Hi, I'm Richard Vague with Tychos. Ever since I was first exposed to the subject of economics, I was taught a very short list of what were represented as certain and absolute truths. One of the biggest was that free trade is virtuous and tariffs are bad. In fact, this has been treated more like a religious tenet or an article of faith than a proposition that could be examined and tested. The mere mention of tariffs was viewed as heresy. Yet history tells us a different story. The U.S. has been one of the biggest practitioners of tariffs over time. In fact, even revered President Abraham Lincoln was a vigorous advocate of protective tariffs, and President James Monroe understood the necessity of tariffs during the nation's formative years. In his sixth annual message to Congress, Monroe stated that while free trade might work in theory, the country's unique circumstances required policies that would, quote, cherish and sustain our manufacturers, end quote. Tariff management was long one of the most important activities at the highest levels of U.S. government, with President William McKinley reportedly carrying around notebooks with details on hundreds of different tariffs. So let's take a quick look at the history of tariffs. During the 1800s, we had tariffs as high as 60%, and they were in the range of 30 to 50% for extended periods. What these three presidents and many others were concerned about was our century-long manufacturing competition with Britain. From the founding of this country until the early 20th century, Britain was our chief rival and for much of that time had superior manufacturing capability compared to the U.S., resulting in better products it could sell at lower costs than American manufacturers. We fought back by literally stealing manufacturing IP and using starkly protective tariffs to give our manufacturers a chance. Otherwise, they would never have been able to survive that competition and would have drowned under a continual flood of better and cheaper British goods. But with the protection of tariffs, protection being a word very pointedly used by these presidents, we rapidly became the world's dominant manufacturer, especially as our domestic market became larger than Britain's. It worked so well that we surpassed Britain in economic size circa 1870 to become the largest Western economy, and then surpassed China circa 1890-ish to become the largest economy in the world. By the time World War I started in 1914, we were as large as Britain, France, and Germany combined, all while having the world's highest tariffs. Note that even with these high tariffs, our inflation was near zero, in fact, often negative through most of this period. So we either became the world's largest economy in spite of having the highest tariffs, or at least in part because we had the world's highest tariffs. So when and why did we start to lower tariffs? The answer is we lowered tariffs in the 1910s, a little bit before, a little bit after we had become the world's most efficient producer. In other words, at the time that we were so superior that free trade worked to our advantage. There was a major interruption to all this with the Great Depression, and that's another story for another day. But free trade came back again after World War II because our manufacturing dominance was at its zenith. But we took that manufacturing dominance for granted. From the 1970s forward, we gradually lost it as U.S. businesses outsourced manufacturing. We lost millions of manufacturing jobs in that process. It's easy to see that advantage slipping away in our trade balance, which tumbled from positive to negative in the late 1970s and 1980s. We can also see that in the wage advancement of those countries into which we exported jobs as compared to the advancements of U.S. wages. One major exception to our free trade preference in that 20th century, one that we are often reminded of these days in discussions around this very subject, was the imposition by Ronald Reagan of 100% tariffs on Japan in 1987 in retaliation for Tokyo's failure to abide by the semiconductor trade agreement between the two nations. It worked. U.S. trade balance with Japan improved and job losses in the U.S. semiconductor manufacturing industry stopped, and in fact, employment in the industry actually grew a bit. The tariffs were targeted to punish such firms as NEC Corp, Hitachi, Fujitsu, Toshiba, and Oki Corp by either pricing some of their goods out of the American market or by forcing them to accept substantial losses on U.S. sales. Before they were imposed, Japan was dumping or selling certain products below market prices to gain market share. After the tariffs, Japan started to play by the rules, though the average cost of memory chips rose for a brief while, more than doubling to $5.50 in early 1988 compared to $2.50 in 1986, but they started to come down after that. So what is the right answer on tariffs? Our view is this: we prefer a world with low or no tariffs, as tariffs often do not produce the intended result. But tariffs are neither good nor bad. The easiest way to think about it is this: we should use tariffs when it is to our net advantage and dispense with them when it is not. Admittedly, that's a complex equation, and managing them is difficult since even within our own borders, a given tariff helps some and hurts others. Currency fluctuations make that management even harder, since gains through tariffs can quickly be offset through a stronger currency. And one other thing, note that trade policy, tariffs, and the like are no substitute for innovation, and the most fundamental path to an improved trade balance is simply to make breakthrough products, which come through heavy federal investment in hardcore basic research, as we see dramatically in U.S. breakthroughs in products in the areas of genetic engineering and artificial intelligence. The thing to keep in mind is that tariff policy is an economic tool to be deployed with skill, not an inviolable article of faith. That's it for this week. Thanks, and note that we'll be off next week for Thanksgiving and come back the week after that, and we wish you a very happy and healthy Thanksgiving holiday. Thanks.